The sun had barely crested the rooftops of Greyhound Lane when Peter Wilkinson clipped the lead onto Mandy's collar. This was the morning of March 30th, 2017, just after 7 o'clock. The Greyhound's tail began its familiar metronome swing, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated joy. Her sleek gray coat caught the pale morning light as she pranced toward the door, eager for the ritual that had defined their mornings for years. Peter inhaled deeply. The air was sharp with the clean bite of early spring, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and new grass. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's kettle whistled. A blackbird trilled from the garden fence.
Ordinary sounds.
Anchoring sounds. Peter glanced back at the kitchen counter where, every morning without fail, a steaming cup of tea would be waiting when he returned. Tracey's silent love letter, brewed to perfection and left precisely where he'd find it. This morning it wasn't there yet, but it would be. It always was. "Come on, girl," he murmured, scratching behind Mandy's ears. Upstairs, Tracey Wilkinson was still beneath the duvet, her body curled into the warmth of the bed. The house held that particular stillness that belongs only to the hour before the world fully wakes. Pierce, their 13-year-old son, was asleep in the next room, his phone charging on the nightstand, his football kit draped over the chair where he'd left it the night before. Peter had asked Pierce if he wanted to come along on the walk. Pierce had mumbled something about tomorrow, Dad, and rolled over. Peter smiled at the memory. Teenage mornings. He understood. He stepped outside, pulling the door shut with a soft click. Mandy tugged at the lead, her nose already tracking some invisible trail only she could sense. The street was empty. Quiet. Safe. Behind him, the house stood solid and familiar. A place they had built together, renovated with their own hands, filled with the accumulation of 25 years of marriage. Photographs lined the hallway. Pierce's school awards hung on the wall. Lydia's biology textbooks were stacked on the shelf, waiting for her next visit home from Bristol University. Everything was where it should be. Everything was as it had always been. And in that particular kind of innocence that belongs to the last normal moment before a life shatters, Peter Wilkinson walked his dog down Greyhound Lane. He believed that when he returned, the tea would be waiting. He believed the day would unfold like any other. But first, we need to understand who they were. This takes us back several years, to the foundation of this family. Tracey Wilkinson's kindness was not performative. It did not announce itself with fanfare or seek recognition. It simply was, woven into the fabric of who she was, expressed in gestures so natural they seemed effortless. Tracey had once been a competitive ballroom dancer, a British Latin American champion who understood the language of grace and precision. But what she carried from those years was not vanity or nostalgia. It was discipline, timing, and the knowledge that small movements, when done with intention, could create something beautiful. Her warmth was the kind that made strangers feel seen. Friends described her as someone who could walk into a room and immediately make everyone feel at ease, as though her mere presence was permission to relax, to be herself. Tracey volunteered with the elderly. She baked for neighbors, and she never walked past someone in need without stopping. If she saw a homeless person on the street, she did not avert her gaze or quicken her step. She went home, made them a meal, and returned. It was not charity in the transactional sense. It was simply what she believed people did for each other. Peter was her counterbalance. Steady, practical, grounded. Where Tracey offered warmth, Peter offered structure. He was a businessman, meticulous and protective. The kind of man who believed that hard work and integrity were non-negotiable. He had built a life for his family through careful planning and relentless effort, and he was proud of what they had created together. Their daughter Lydia, 20 years old and studying biology at Bristol University, had inherited both parents' strengths. Brilliant, driven, compassionate. She called home often and texted her mother daily, sharing the small and large moments of university life. The bond between them was unshakable. And then there was Pierce, 13 years old. Handsome, funny, and effortlessly charming. Lydia described him as someone who could make friends in an empty room. He loved football, films, and their dog. Pierce and Tracey shared a passion for the old Carry-On films. They watched them together on lazy Sunday afternoons, laughing at jokes they'd seen 100 times. They were, by all accounts, a family that had figured something out. Not perfect. No family is. But close. Solid.
Safe.
Peter and Tracey had adopted Mandy from a Greyhound Rescue Trust. The dog had become a beloved member of the family. Every morning, without fail, Peter walked her. Every evening, Tracey made sure she was fed and comfortable. It was a rhythm, a pattern, a life built on small, reliable acts of love. The Wilkinsons were careful people, thoughtful people, generous people, and generosity, as history would soon demonstrate, can sometimes be catastrophically misunderstood. Tracey was leaving the supermarket, bags in hand, when she saw him. A young man, 23 years old, curled into a cardboard box just outside the entrance. His clothes were filthy, his face gaunt. He was shivering despite the relatively mild weather. His body folded in on itself, as though trying to disappear. Most people walked past without stopping. Some glanced, registered the scene, and kept moving.
It was easier that way.
Less complicated. But Tracey Wilkinson was not most people. She approached slowly, crouching down so she was at his eye level. "Are you hungry?" she asked gently. The young man looked up. His name was Aaron Barley, though she wouldn't learn that until later. His eyes were hollow, guarded, but he nodded. "Come with me," Tracey said, standing. "Let's get you something to eat." She took him home. It was a decision that, in the moment, felt natural. Obvious, even. Tracey made him dinner. She gave him a warm place to sit. She listened as he talked haltingly about his life. Peter joined them, assessing the situation with his characteristic practicality. This young man needed help. They could provide it. Over the following weeks, they drove Aaron to council offices, helping him secure accommodation in a hostel. Tracey made sure he had breakfast and dinner every day, ensuring he never went hungry. Peter offered him a job as a laborer in one of his businesses. For the first time in Aaron Barley's chaotic, fractured life, it seemed that stability might be possible. Aaron had been born in 1993. His mother worked in a factory. His father was a publican. But the circumstances of his birth were troubled. He was the product of an incestuous relationship between an uncle and niece, with a 19-year age gap. By the age of 6, Aaron had been orphaned. His father died of cancer when Aaron was 4. 2 years later, his mother suffered a fatal heart attack. Aaron was shuffled through foster care, moved between homes and family members, subjected to physical and sexual abuse. At 13, he was the subject of a missing persons investigation. By the time he aged out of the system, he was sleeping on the streets, abusing substances, struggling with alcohol addiction. The Wilkinsons did not know the full extent of Aaron's history. They knew he had been dealt a cruel hand in life, that he had suffered losses and hardships most people never experience. They knew he needed help. And they believed, with the kind of optimism that comes from genuine goodness, that their support could make a difference. For 5 months, it seemed to be working. Aaron had a stable income, a roof over his head, and a family that cared about him. Peter even helped him set up a phone contract, a small gesture that felt monumental to someone who had never had anyone look out for him. At Christmas, Aaron sat at their table. He handed Tracey a card. On the front, he had written these words, "To the mother I never had." Tracey's eyes welled with tears. She hugged him. In that moment, she believed. They all believed. Their kindness had made a difference. For a brief time, there was hope. But hope is fragile. And redemption is not guaranteed. September 2016, it started small. Aaron stopped showing up to work. When Peter called to check on him, Aaron claimed he had relapsed. He said his mother had recently died. A lie, as it turned out. His behavior became erratic, aggressive. Managers reported incidents where he had become hostile, unpredictable. Peter made the difficult decision to let him go. It was handled gently, amicably. They wished him well. The family lost contact with him. But then, a few months later, Peter found him again, sleeping in their driveway, covered in bruises, looking as though he had been assaulted. Once again, the Wilkinsons stepped in. They found him new accommodation. They gave him odd jobs around the house. They invited him back into their lives, hoping that this time, with enough support, it would stick. When the new year came, Aaron had a new flat in Brearley Hill. He was in full-time employment as a furniture polisher. He visited the Wilkinsons a couple of times a week for dinner. Things seemed to be improving. But then he lost his job again. After that, his flat. And once again, he was without a home. The Wilkinsons let him stay in their house on Greyhound Lane for 2 weeks while he looked for somewhere new to live. It was during this time that Tracey began to notice something unsettling. Aaron lingered. He stared at the house when he thought no one was looking. He asked questions about their routines, their schedules, small things that individually meant nothing, but together they formed a pattern. Peter canceled the phone contract he had been paying for. It was a minor decision, practical and reasonable. Aaron had stopped paying his share. The contract was no longer necessary. But to Aaron, it felt like rejection. In his mind, the family that had once welcomed him was now pulling away. The support he had come to depend on was being withdrawn. And in the fractured, damaged architecture of Aaron Barley's psyche, rejection was not something to grieve. It was something to punish. What the Wilkinsons did not know, what they could not have known, was that Aaron Barley had a history of violence that stretched back to childhood. 21 previous convictions, starting at age 12. Grievous bodily harm. Assaulting a police officer. Drug charges. Possession of a firearm. He had once assaulted a former partner with a piece of wood, hitting her 50 times before breaking it in half and trying to stab her with the broken end. He had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for that offense at age 18. He had written a hit list while in care. He had told people at a rehabilitation center that he wanted to kill someone with a knife. He had posted on Facebook about going on a killing spree. In February 2017, just 1 month before the massacre, a project worker had assessed him as seeking control, being manipulative and playing mind games. In a text message, Aaron had referred to himself as a predator. He wrote, "Stay a predator. Change the prey." But none of this information had been shared with the Wilkinsons. They were not equipped to recognize the warning signs. They saw a troubled young man who needed help. They believed, as good people often do, that kindness could overcome trauma. They were wrong. March 26, 2017, Mother's Day 4 days before the attack, something beautiful happened. Lydia Wilkinson had been planning the surprise for weeks. She had driven home from Bristol University, sneaking into the house while her mother was out. She hid in the back of the family's Land Rover. When Tracey returned and opened the boot to unload groceries, Lydia jumped out, arms wide. Tracey screamed, then laughed, then cried. Tears of pure, unrestrained joy. They embraced in the driveway, holding each other tightly, rocking back and forth. It was one of those perfect moments that feels suspended in time, untouched by anything else. "I can't believe you're here," Tracey whispered, her voice breaking. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," Lydia said, grinning through her own tears. They spent the day together, talking, laughing, making plans for the summer. Lydia told her about her studies, her friends, the upcoming university ball where she needed help choosing a dress. Tracey listened, asking questions, offering advice, radiating the kind of maternal pride that needs no words. Pierce joined them later, teasing his sister about her surprise, laughing as Tracey recounted the moment Lydia had jumped out of the car. They watched films together that afternoon, eating popcorn, sprawled across the couch in the comfortable chaos of family.
It was real joy.
Pure and unassailable. 4 days later, Lydia would replay this memory endlessly. The warmth of her mother's hug would become a ghost she would cling to in the months that followed. A lifeline connecting her to a version of her life that no longer existed. The night before, March 29th, 2017, late evening CCTV footage would later reveal what no one inside the house could have suspected. At some point after dark, Aaron Barley climbed the garden fence. He moved quietly, methodically, testing the back door. It was locked. He tried a window. Also locked. For a moment, he stood in the shadows, assessing his options. Then he made a decision. He hid in the shed. All night. Inside the house, the Wilkinson family went about their evening routines, unaware of the presence outside. Tracey cleaned the kitchen, wiping down the counters, putting away the dishes. Peter checked the locks on the doors. A nightly habit born of years of careful responsibility.
Pierce played on his phone.
Texted his friends. Eventually drifted off to sleep. Outside, in the cold darkness of the garden shed, Aaron Barley waited. Every creak of the floorboards inside. Every gust of wind that rattled the fence. Every rustle of the tree branches. He noted it all. Calculated.
Planned.
This was not impulse. This was patience. The patience of someone who had been hurt, rejected, and was now bent toward vengeance. He had brought a balaclava. He had brought knives. He had thought through every detail, every contingency. And as the hours stretched toward morning, he remained perfectly still, waiting for the moment when the house would be vulnerable. When the sun began to rise, casting pale light across the garden, Aaron Barley prepared himself. The day was about to begin. Peter exited the house through the back door in the early hours of the morning with the house dog Mandy for his morning walk, an exercise he does every day to stay fit and in shape. But when he returned from his walk with Mandy at 7:15 in the morning, slightly later than usual, the greyhound trotted beside him, her tongue lolling happily, tail still wagging. As Peter approached the house, he noticed something odd. There was no cup of tea waiting on the kitchen counter. For 25 years, without fail, Tracey had left him a cup of tea every morning when he returned from his walk.
It was such a small thing.
Such an automatic gesture. But its absence felt immediately wrong. Peter frowned, glancing toward the stairs. Maybe she had slept in. Maybe Pierce had needed her attention.
Maybe.
He opened the back door. A figure lunged at him from behind the kitchen wall. A man in a balaclava, holding a knife above his head. Peter's mind barely had time to register the sight before the blade came down. The first stab hit his back, then his abdomen, then his face. Pain exploded through his body. Sharp, immediate, overwhelming. He staggered backward, trying to shield himself, trying to comprehend what was happening. The man's voice cut through the chaos.
You bastard.
And in that voice, despite the balaclava, despite the shock, Peter recognized him. Aaron, he gasped, his voice trembling. Aaron, we tried to help you. The words did not stop the knife. Aaron Barley stabbed him again.
And again.
6 times in total. Twice in the back. Twice in the abdomen. Twice in the face. Each blow was deliberate. Vicious. Fueled by a rage that Peter could not understand. And then Aaron was gone, running toward the front of the house, yanking open the door to the Land Rover. Speeding away in the stolen vehicle, Peter stumbled into the garden, collapsing onto a chair. His hands were slick with blood. His vision blurred. He fumbled for his phone, dialing 999 with shaking fingers. Please, he whispered to the operator. Please check on my wife and son. Upstairs, Tracey Wilkinson had been asleep when Aaron entered her room. She woke to the sensation of pain. Sudden. Incomprehensible. Tearing through her body. She tried to scream. To fight. To understand. But the blade came down again. And again. 17 times. She had no time to process what was happening. No time to plead or reason or beg. She died in her bed, beneath the duvet that had kept her warm on countless ordinary mornings. Naked and defenseless against the violence that had come for her. In the next room, Pierce woke to the sound of his mother's terror. He tried to move. Tried to run. But Aaron was faster. 8 stab wounds. One so severe it nearly divided his spinal cord. Pierce collapsed onto his stomach, struggling to breathe, trying desperately to crawl along the floor towards safety that did not exist. His young body, strong from years of playing football, fought to survive even as his injuries made survival impossible. He was 13 years old. He would never make it to the school gates where his sister had promised to meet him the next day. He would never watch another film with his mother. He would never grow up. Within 7 minutes of Peter's 999 call, a paramedic and rapid response vehicle arrived at Greyhound Lane. 2 ambulances followed. 2 air ambulance helicopters were dispatched, carrying critical care doctors and paramedics. When the first responders entered the house, they were confronted with a scene of unspeakable horror. One paramedic emerged from the house and radioed to the team outside. These were his words: 1 dead, 1 in cardiac arrest. Peter, bleeding profusely in the garden, heard the words. His world collapsed. Tracey was pronounced dead at the scene. Pierce was rushed to Birmingham Children's Hospital, where medical staff fought desperately to save him. They could not. He died a short time later. Peter was taken to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. His injuries were life-threatening but, somehow, survivable. He would spend 11 days in the hospital, 6 of them in intensive care. Meanwhile, dashcam footage from inside the stolen Land Rover and from other drivers on the road captured Aaron Barley fleeing the scene. Police pursued him. The chase was brief. He crashed. Inside the car, officers found a knife wrapped in a wet shirt. Aaron Barley was taken into custody without further incident. Now, 10 in the morning. Lydia receives the call. Lydia was at Bristol University when her phone rang. Her boyfriend's voice was strained. There's been an incident in Stourbridge. You need to look it up. She opened Google, typed in Stourbridge incident. The first image that appeared was her house, taped off, surrounded by emergency vehicles, police officers everywhere. Her hands began to shake. She called the police, asked what was happening. The officer on the other end of the line hesitated, and then told her something that shattered her understanding of reality. There had been an attack. Her mother was dead. Her brother was critically injured. Her father was in surgery. Lydia's mind refused to process the words. They felt distant, unreal, like something happening to someone else. But as she was driven to Birmingham, the truth began to settle over her like a suffocating weight. By the time she arrived at the hospital, Pierce had died. She was taken to the critical care ward where her father lay, unconscious, hooked up to machines, fighting for his life. Doctors surrounded his bed. She could not speak to him. She could only wait. And then came the task no 20-year-old should ever have to perform. She was asked to identify the bodies of her mother and brother. She walked into the room where they lay, side by side. Tracey's face was peaceful, as though she were simply sleeping. Pierce looked so young, so small. Lydia sat with them, stroked their hair, whispered apologies she knew could never be enough. Her words were these: "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm so sorry." She stayed because she knew it would be the last time she saw them, the last time she could touch them, speak to them, be in their presence. When she finally left the room, she thought, "From now on, I live every day for Dad." October 2017. The trial at Birmingham Crown Court. Aaron Barley pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Psychiatric evaluations were conducted. They found no evidence of diminished responsibility. Aaron Barley knew what he was doing when he climbed that fence. He knew when he hid in the shed. He knew when he picked up the knife. The prosecution described Barley as a compulsive liar and a manipulator. Former foster carers described him as a Jekyll and Hyde character, sensitive and caring one moment, violent and threatening the next. The defense argued that Barley's chaotic childhood had left him with borderline personality disorder, that he had perceived the family as turning their back on him. But even the defense admitted there was no evidence to substantiate this. The Wilkinsons had shown extraordinary kindness. The presiding judge called the attack vicious and unprovoked against people who had demonstrated extraordinary kindness and generosity. Lydia addressed the court. Her voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "My parents helped you. You repaid them with destruction and heartache. You have obliterated my life, murdered half my family, very nearly all of it. I am a shell of my former self. Sometimes I wake up and don't want to be here. What did they do to deserve this?" She would never forgive him, she said. Aaron appeared to cry. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry."
Peter also spoke.
There's no motive. There is no explanation. All we ever did was help him. Tracey found him in a cardboard box outside Tesco's one day, picked him up and said, "Get in my car. You're not going to sleep here anymore." As a family, we helped him. And that is why the crime is so much more unbelievable. Because all we ever did was help him. The judge sentenced Aaron Barley to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. She told him he may never be released. "You clearly represent a very significant risk of serious harm to members of the public," she said. Aaron sat emotionless, offering no reaction. Later, the Solicitor General appealed the sentence as unduly lenient. 3 judges agreed. The minimum term was increased to 35 years. June 7, 2017. The funeral for Tracey and Pierce Wilkinson was held at St. Mary's Church. They shared a single coffin. Pierce's godfather, delivering the eulogy, said these words, "Some of you may be surprised to see just the one coffin. But they are together, inseparable, as they always were in life." Mandy, the family greyhound, stood outside with other dogs from the rescue center, forming a guard of honor as the coffin was carried into the church. The Kidderminster male voice choir sang "Can't Help Falling in Love." At the end of the service, they sang Pierce's favorite song, "Hooked on a Feeling." Lydia sat in the front row, holding her father's hand. She had not slept properly in weeks. She had anxiety attacks. She could not be left alone. But she was there, and she would continue to be there. Peter and Lydia returned to the house on Greyhound Lane. It had been blessed by their local priest. Every room sanctified in an attempt to reclaim the space from the horror that had occurred there. "It's our home," Peter said simply. "After taking so much from us, we couldn't possibly let him take anything else. We love the house. It is very much a family home that we built and renovated ourselves. We like being there. But the house was not the same. It could never be the same." In February 2018, they put it up for sale. Lydia returned to Bristol University to complete her degree in biology. "We are determined not to let this take away any more of our life," she said. "I'd like to be a researcher, to do medical research, to continue the help and support that my mom would give to people by researching things like cancer and Parkinson's disease. I hope to give back to people and continue her legacy." She raised £13,000 for Birmingham Children's Hospital, the hospital that had tried so hard to save her little brother. Teachers from Pierce's school ran a marathon in his memory. They raised £3,550 for the Greyhound Trust, his favorite charity. Lydia said she does not feel hatred for Aaron Barley. It was more important to her, she explained, to channel her energy into building something positive from what had happened. But she also offered a warning. "My mom and dad did an amazing thing, and I would never discourage anyone from helping others in a similar way. But I would always encourage people to go through the charities and organizations specifically set up for that type of thing. These charities know the system. They have the correct vetting processes in place. There is no explanation that makes sense. Only this. A woman saw a man in need and took him home. A family opened their door and offered a second chance. And on an ordinary March morning, that trust became violence. This is not a story about naivety. Tracey Wilkinson was not naive. She was compassionate. She was generous. She believed, as many good people do, that kindness could heal trauma and that offering help was a moral imperative. She was not wrong to believe that. But the truth that emerged from this tragedy is uncomfortable and unforgiving. Compassion without boundaries. Trust without vetting. Generosity without safeguards. These things can be exploited. Not because kindness is wrong, but because some people are beyond the reach of kindness alone. Aaron Barley had a lifetime of documented violence. He had threatened to kill before. He had written hit lists. He had assaulted partners. He had spoken openly about wanting to murder someone with a knife. But none of this information was available to the Wilkinsons. The systems that should have protected them, social services, probation, mental health services, operated in silos. Warning signs were noted, but not shared. Threats were heard, but dismissed. And so a family that wanted nothing more than to help someone in need paid the ultimate price for a system that failed to protect them from a predator they could not have recognized. Tracey Wilkinson was 50 years old. Pierce Wilkinson was 13. Their loss is immeasurable. Their legacy endures.